Good morning, everyone, and welcome to One Life City Church. And thank you again for joining us today, which is Daylight Saving Sunday. So I'm sure we're all a little bit tired, a little more tired than normal, that is. And today we'll be continuing our Lament series with a very special panel. As you know, the purpose behind this series is to invite different various members of our congregation to share their stories and to share their journeys, particularly over this past year. And we do this as a way of inviting different voices in our community to bless us with their wisdom. That's one of the values of our churches. And we also do this as an invitation for us to invite God and to invite each other to accompany us in our life journeys in a deeper, more intimate manner. And as we're gearing up very quickly to resume in-person Sunday services again, we're hoping that these Lament panels will help facilitate this process of all of us reconnecting with each other, our process of reconnecting with friends, new and old. And as we all begin to reconnect again, I imagine that there's just going to be a lot of, hey, how are you? How have things been? It's been a long time, followed by a little bit of awkwardness. I mean, how do we do justice to just a whole year of life in just a few moments or even just a few minutes after Sunday, especially given the year that we've all had this past year? And again, we hope that these panels, I know last week it was a panel of parents. Next week, it's going to be a panel of young adults, 30 years and under. And our hope for these panels is that we can all get a bit of a head start catching up on how we really are. How this year really has been for each of us. And this week, we're just so honored to have a panel of very special people in our community. We have Amanda, we have Rayanne, we have Renea, we have Wilson, and they're all dear members of our church family who also happen to also be medical professionals. And today, we're going to invite them to share with us what their journey has been like this past year during the COVID outbreak. And as they do this morning, our posture for the rest of us is to listen and to bear witness to the ways that they have survived, that they have struggled, and that they have sacrificed, not only for our church community, but for our communities here at large. And we do this Lament panel to honor them, so that they don't have to carry all the gravity of this past year alone in secret. And though many of us were not on the front lines fighting this pandemic as they were, we can still walk together and support each other nonetheless. So at this time, if I can invite the rest of the panel to join me on the front stage of Zoom. And to start us off today, I have a first initial question for all of us. And that question is this: just this last week marks the 1-year anniversary of the lockdowns due to COVID-19 pandemic. I just want to invite each of you to share with us a little bit about what it was like for you when this as medical professionals, when this pandemic began 1 year ago. If I can invite Wilson to kind of start us off, we'll go from there.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, One Life City, for inviting us to share a little bit. And I think as we were preparing a few nights ago, we were trying to ask some questions and figure out, how best to prepare for today. It just reminded me that it's been a year. Can't believe it has been a year already. So what was it for me? How was it like for me in the beginning? I think, as most of everybody in the United States, and definitely for me, and initially when we heard about the disease, it was way far out in a different country. And very similarly, there were other diseases in the past that were far out, and nothing impacting myself or impacting home, But I think this particular one, initially, okay, you hear the news, you keep yourself updated, but then slowly it gets becoming more people were getting sick, and people were not just getting sick, but people were dying. And I think for me, starting to hear the stories when the virus started impacting certain cities and towns in Italy. I started reading their stories. I think particularly was just watching a video, probably on YouTube, about this one doctor sharing his experience in the super height of their experience of dealing with COVID. Not just people wearing the gowns and getting the protection stuff, but just seeing the fear and the sadness in their eyes as they share that they can't believe it's happening to them, that these people are getting so sick and people are dying. I think also it really hit home was when they start seeing their own colleagues, not just nurses and other staff, but other doctors that were supposed to help treat patients started to get sick. That started to kind of, you could say, freak me out a little bit. Like a westernized country has the capability and the staff and medicine, so to say, to help people, but see that they are not able to or struggling. Felt like hearing that in my mind, I was like, oh no, a big storm's coming, and how are we going to be able to handle it, be prepared, and that kind of stuff. So, and then lastly, like once it hit the U.S. and definitely New York, where I grew up,
where are you from?
And it was just, starting to get scary and just starting to build that anxiety.
Yeah, so this image of this storm that's coming and it's inevitable, just a matter of when. Rayanne, how about yourself? Like, how was it for you 1 year ago?
Yeah, so a year ago, actually, I was looking back on my journal and I realized that it had been maybe just a couple of months coming back from maternity leave after having twins. So my babies, the boys were around 8-9 months at the time. My mom was with us, my mother-in-law was with us, navigating the news that we were getting, and just kind of also taking in that things are changing so quickly. And I think that first day of coming into work and having our first COVID patient, I remember that day so clearly, because I'd heard, the news, and just so all of us were bracing for what was to come the best way we could, trying to prepare, trying to gather all our masks, our shields, our isolation gowns, our gloves, and also providing a way or changing up our routine a little bit. So that first day, just going in, receiving our first COVID patient, just a little bit of background, I work in the ICU at a local hospital here. I've been there for 12 years now. And remembering that day and the emotions of anxiety that I haven't ever felt in my years of nursing, seeing the fear that we had, as critical care nurses, we take care of the most unstable critical patients. We're familiar with death. We're familiar with diseases. We pride in these guidelines and best practices we use to alleviate the person's pain. And I think coming into or facing the unknown so head on brought fear, brought about a lot of questions. As nurses, we spend hours and hours of time in the patient's room, taking time to put on our protective gear to keep ourselves safe. That way we can take care of our patients the best way we could. And just feeling like even the best that we could give, medications, treatments, that we didn't see great outcomes, and that hurt. That it hurt because there were so many unknowns, and but we had to be flexible, definitely, and just try to carry each other in it, in the anxiety. And it was mostly surviving. I think in ICU, seeing our patients, um, the feeling of anxiety and just feeling helpless as far as just seeing that this virus was affecting all ages. At first, we thought 65 and older, the vulnerable, and you were starting to see 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds. We're starting to see different ethnicities and unfortunately affecting our brown population a lot more. Um, and it seemed like we just couldn't get a handle like how merciless, how really merciless this thing was. And just trying to provide the best we could and just kind of feeling like the best we could wasn't enough. And also, I think just for our coworkers, having to be stretched, opening up different units, converting them to COVID, and just the emotional toll over time was so heavy. And again, as an ICU nurse, we're familiar with death, but to that extent and to that rate, and seeing it so head on. There's things I can't unsee, and I can't expect people to understand. But what we've seen and witnessed is so many times unbearable.
Yeah.
Just the gravity of the pain and suffering.
Yeah, and I think that's a sober thought, considering that you are an ICU nurse of 12 years, and it was like that even for a person like you. I mean, Renea, you've been a nurse for 40 years. What was it like for you in the beginning?
Okay, I can't believe all these things that's happening, and I never seen this kind of experience in my whole more than 30 years here in the US, working as a nurse, working in the surgery department. And last year, it's been a year now. Last year we just do emergencies, and it's really a lot of things that we do inside the OR. We do a lot of change in guidelines, protocols in OR, and the most tragic thing, like picking up this patient in the ER for an emergency bleeding or what you call that, a ruptured appendectomy, and doing all this bowel resection. And we're also worried of things that like our preparation and our setup in the OR, and it's really hard. It's really hard. I never experienced this kind of pandemic that is going on. Like a lot of losses, a lot of I work in a life and death situation also in OR, and
Yeah.
taking care of all the flat lines and having the patient revive is already a miracle right there. But it's so traumatic for me when I see families and explaining to them their expectations and what the updates of any piece of information that they're desperate of. And I'm acutely aware of the need to take extra time to explain to them the development of to the family, like calling outside, asking how their son, daughter, or family member doing in the surgery during the time. And as Rayanne said, we work as a team also in OR, so it's all of our team effort to do the best we can to for the benefit of to help and bring all these patients to life. And it's a reality. It's tough. It's a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
In the beginning of 2020, I went home to to be with my mom in the Philippines, having all these reunions in us. And then my mom got sick of pneumonia. That was early in January. And I see, like, God sent me there for a specific purpose. And then, like, when my mom got sick, I was there. I was there at her bedside until God took her. And right there, I know, like, my purpose being a nurse, as like, I felt like when my mom was having all these pains, and then when I look at my patients, and I see my mom on their faces too, like when they were all suffering from all this, because my mom was also diagnosed of having pneumonia at that time, and I don't know when, if it's COVID or what, but it's hard. It's hard. Dealing with it is very hard.
There's been a lot of death this last year. And just recognize that you all are on the front lines of witnessing this as it's happening. And you're the ones that are explaining and speaking these things and talking to the family members as well. Amanda, I know now it's a 1-year mark of COVID, and even though the numbers have improved and we're inching slowly back to another sense of normalcy, we don't imagine that the memories of this past year is going to just disappear, and be instantly resolved. As you think about where you're at now, given this last year, what kind of experiences and memories do you feel like kind of remain with you even now?
Yeah, so a little bit of background. I work at St. Jude. I'm an occupational therapist in the hospital. And so we're used to being part of the rehabilitation side, right? Trying to get patients up and moving and hopefully home and out of the hospital. So at the beginning, obviously there was a lot of anxiety and fear because we didn't know what was happening. Things were changing constantly. Like literally every day we would come into work, something was different or the guidelines would be different. And it was just very frustrating not knowing how to protect ourselves, not really knowing how to treat these patients. And because a few of us, me and my coworkers, were younger and healthier, a few of us kind of were more willing to go and just jump into the COVID rooms and be able to do what was needed, versus there was a lot of fear from some of our coworkers who were older, maybe more health compromised. We were trying to protect them, but also knowing that put ourselves and potentially whoever we live with, our family, is at risk. And so as things kind of had progressed throughout the past year, I mean, the worst of it was definitely through December and January. Because we work very closely at the bedside as therapists, and I do a lot of hands-on stuff helping to take care of patients' basic needs, there were only a few other health type professionals who could kind of support nursing when nursing staff were so overstretched and they were getting sick and their ratios were going up, so they're expected to care for more patients. So I just remember like the burnout already from the beginning that just kind of stretched on to just a few months ago. And trying to kind of support and help when our COVID numbers went, for context, like at the beginning, that first peak, maybe at 60 patients. And even then we were kind of, feeling nervous about if it was going to get higher. This past December, we hit 230 at like a 300-bed hospital. And it was horrible conditions, honestly, like patients being seen in the basement and what looked like a war zone for them, not being able to breathe, us trying to help them to get stronger, watching their oxygen levels drop in ways that we never would have worked with them before. And, potentially knowing like, are they even going to make it? Or what we're doing even making a difference? And there was all of that constantly. And we're trying to like keep them calm and help them to breathe, but their lungs are just so ravaged by this disease that it's horrible. Or sometimes they seem fine, and then a day later, all of a sudden they're tanking, and shortly after they pass, like it's, people go to the hospital to hopefully become healed and treated and be able to leave. But like for people to come into our hospital, they never leave, and to see the amount of patients that we were treating to be lost so quickly, it was devastating. It was nothing like, I know that Rayanne's maybe had more experience with that in the ICU. And though I work in the ICU too, and kind of all over the hospital, it was never to this degree. It was just so overwhelming. And it really felt hopeless at one point of, no help is coming, like things aren't getting better. Me and my friends were working, we already worked full time. We were trying to add on extra days, stay later into the late evenings to work 12-hour shifts to try to just help. And even then it was like the exhaustion, the emotional toll of like trying to care for patients because their families couldn't be there, trying to even just offer emotional support and comfort through all of our PP, and when they only see our eyes, but we're trying to care for them. And then, yeah, just even though we only know them for a brief time during the hospital, recognizing that this is a person that is loved and cared for by somebody, by their own families, and they can't even be here. And they're saying goodbye over iPad screens. Like, it's so devastating and so unfair. It felt at points like, man, I'm grateful that I can be here because it's such a unique situation where not a lot of people can care for literally the most vulnerable and the most sick, but at the same time, like, so unfair that their loved ones can't be the ones holding on to them in their last days and moments, So it's been a lot of just, and like, as we were kind of preparing for this too, like remembering specific faces and specific conversations, and like moments of like deep emotion and grief, even at work. Like, I've never seen this many of my coworkers like break down and cry in the middle of the workday too, which we try to, be strong in where we're at, but it just was too much. There were days where it just felt like too much. So I also am super grateful that I have such great support at work, but yeah, and of course at home too. But yeah, it's been so rough. And now that it's better, I'm grateful, but I think we're also sometimes like bracing ourselves, like, is it over? Is there going to be more that comes that we're going to have to deal with? It still feels kind of uncertain.
Thanks, Amanda. And I think that imagery is really powerful and really fitting, like the image of a war zone. And I know, Rand, when we've talked about this last year, you've kind of talked about how it's like living two realities. There's a reality in the hospital, reality at home, and tell us more about what it's like to like constantly go between those two realities. And yeah, what is that like?
Going back to it is just thinking about it is painful. It definitely having that sense that we were in this battle constantly. We were in the trenches, doing what we can. And sometimes, like when you're off to war, you're gone for years at a time. For us as healthcare workers, it's a day in the war, and then you come back and you have your family time. You kind of decompress, but not really, and then you have to like get ready for the next time you go in. So I think it's just that perpetual like up and down has just been so difficult. And like last year, just feeling like those two realities of, yes, seeing the pain and the suffering of our patients, their families, and also in each other, that I can't expect anyone else outside to understand, but it's something that I wouldn't want anyone else to witness. And if I could be there, to serve in a place of someone else, like I would. Like, it doesn't make me change, or it doesn't make me want to change my profession, though at times it's like, I don't know if I can handle this anymore, but when you're in it and you see everyone step up, and those that are calling to do that, just you see, even in the midst of death and sadness, that there is hope, that there's the good in humanity that we see. And so seeing that in my workplace, and then coming out too and seeing that things don't look like, sometimes it's like it may not be as serious for people as far as like the gravity of this pandemic. But for me, like, it always takes me back to it's more than just numbers, it's more than statistics, it's more than studies, these are faces, like Amanda was sharing. These are voices, family members. At one point, there's, a husband and wife in a hospital, like suffering to, and the mindset of just caring for that one person and seeing that person as a human being. Like, have we forgotten that these are people, that these are humans, that these are lives made in the image of God, image bearers, that are suffering, that they, and it's sometimes it just, it's hard to put into words, really the tension in living in these two realities. But the more I'm aware that the presence of God in the middle of everything, in the tension and in the brokenness of everyone, those that are directly impacted and those that are not so close to it, but throughout this year, like, we all know someone that was affected. We all know someone that has lost someone, our family included, so it's just, I have to think, of the humanness of this, that this is more than just what we think is best, or our own freedoms or things like that, but it's
that's right.
one person that we're there for.
And I think that's about as Christian as we can be in how to look at the situation. And something I've noticed and really appreciated what all of you have modeled this last year is that even though you're living in these realities, like, you're in the battlefield and the rest of us aren't. We're not in that battlefield. And yet you all have allowed others to walk with you, even though they don't know exactly what it's like to be there. I'd love for y'all to share a little bit about what it's been like to have other people walk with you, especially those of us who aren't medical professionals. I know you've walked with several people this past year. What has that been like for you guys? How did you bring them in, and how is that helpful?
Yeah, I think for me is having definitely the space to talk about it, especially when you're scared or sad or frustrated, having somebody to hear you out. I think definitely, there's definitely a not say divide per se, but like inability to fully see what you see unless you're in it, right?
Right.
So definitely sharing with coworkers and other people who are in the health profession, so we get sort of say understand. Kind of like, I don't know who mentioned it, like sort of like you're a part of a war, and the veterans who gone through war experience such intense situations and trauma, and so say PTSD, right?
Yeah.
But as they try to, they try to explain that to other people, but those who have not experienced it can fully comprehend, and relate. But I think for me, definitely having other healthcare professionals, but also, certain family and friends just check up on you and say, yeah, I'm not doing well today, and just be able to let my emotions spew out a little bit. It's like, yeah, that was hard, and it's still hard, even though sometimes, still feel very helpless that we can't fix it, but definitely having that space to share. I guess in some sense to, ultimately feel like I'm not alone in feeling that when I'm sharing that.
And again, you guys are all professionally trained and been in this line of work for a long time. And just to kind of see and witness just how much emotions, how heavy this is for all of you is really noteworthy. And I know, like Amanda, Leanne, the women in our life group that really kind of come together during this time. Would one of you maybe share a little bit of what that was like? I mean, and not everyone in our life group is are medical professionals, and yet you guys were still able to walk through some of this together.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, our life group has been consistently meeting over Zoom throughout the past year, which was huge. Being able to have that space, even amongst the women, especially, we do a lot of prayer and kind of vulnerable sharing times together about what's really going on and how we can support one another. And I know that their prayers and check-ins and support has been huge for both myself and Rayanne. I really felt like there were days where it was a struggle to feel motivated to go to work, or just felt really weighed down, and to be able to reach out and know that immediately people would be with us, kind of carrying us. Those prayers really lifted us up and supported us through the hardest days, and that was huge. And even just friends who would drop off things to us, write letters, and the ways that they would just encourage, even in a safe distanced modified way, that really that made us feel seen and cared for. So I really appreciate the church community that came around us.
Yeah, sounds great. And we really appreciate just how you guys have modeled community and modeled reaching out. And I know even for those of us who aren't medical professionals, there's so many of us in our community that we all have our own unique hurts and pains, that arguably no one else can relate to. Like, it's the reality we're in that other people cannot relate to. And yet it takes a special kind of courage and trust to still reach out, and knowing that others may not perfectly understand and still receive that kind of support from each other. So thanks for modeling that. And, as we begin to kind of transition and head towards the close of today's panel, I'd love to get a sense of, and I know this doesn't make all this suffering disappear, doesn't make everything all ponies and rainbows, but I also know that even in the midst of all this darkness, each of you have seen God's presence, and God has kind of accompanied you through this as well. I'd love to start with Renee, and ask you, in what ways has God walked with you and accompanied you and lamented with you during this past year? And how have you seen God show up at work?
I have the same, like, I struggled with stress, burnout, and nagging fear for all these things that has happening. And it reminds me of God's love and his faithfulness. And I'm reminded myself all the time about Jesus' costly love. His death and resurrection had become not just something I believed, but a hope that sustained me all day long.
Mm.
And then I rest my heart in prayer and meditation to overcome all this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Renee.
And a total dependence on him and all things that I do. That all this work is for him. And although all of us struggled, but I'm so proud of my team at work, like working hand in hand and showing compassion and empathy to families, and having all this peer support among each other. It's something like, it's so helpful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Similarly, I think because of the weight and the heaviness of this year, there was just this like desperation for God that I haven't experienced before. It's like, to get through the day, I literally just needed him. I just had to ask for him. And looking back now, you know, like I mentioned before, we're in our patients' rooms for hours at a time, and there's just kind of this eeriness in the room. It's quiet, and times too, we have families speaking on FaceTime calls. But what I've like recognized is that just his presence in that room, in that space of suffering, is unlike I haven't experienced that before, because he is a God who's close to the brokenhearted. You know, like the things that we believe in as Christians, that Jesus is for the world. Jesus died for this. Jesus made a way, and recognizing that time, even though it was hard to see at the time, that it was actually a gift from him to be able to be beside a person that he cared for, that he loved, holding the patient's hand and praying for them. And then just when I would pray to God in the room, that he would give songs, you know, to me, and I would play that in the computer. No one else would know, you know, just kind of just sometimes, because sometimes music and songs, or a lot of times music and songs for me are articulate, express better than words. So filling that room with worship, filling that room, declaring who God is in that room, even if it's just like a small prayer, and even if it's so hard to even get the words out because I'm so just feeling that pain, you know, and pushing through that, and realizing also that the nearness of God, it's yes, he's good, and at the same time, I still don't understand fully like his purpose in this.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing, God? Like,
Yeah.
you know, you could take this away. You know, I know that you know the answer. And like, I would just like walk from room to room, or like be in the elevator. I'm like just feeling like so down, and I'm like, I don't see, I don't hear you, you know? Yeah. And then like our conversations would be so real, like, I thought you had my back, you know? And then, but then he would say, I'm here. Like, I'm here with you. I get you. I see you. You know, I feel all this. And you don't have to be ashamed to be, like, you don't have to be ashamed to feel mad at me. Like, at first I was like, oh, I shouldn't be, you know, like, I should be so hopeful and trusting God. And like, it's hard, you know, but I think God is inviting me to this like deeper, like real friendship with him. Mm-hmm. Before it was like, oh, he's my loving father. Yes, he is. He's my good God, you know. And now it's like, man, I get you. Like, I suffered. I experienced, like, Jesus experienced pain on this earth. Like, he was fully human. He was able to feel what it was like to fear, you know, and to have freedom in that, and for me to like sit in it and be okay in it, and not have like the answer to it, even though that was like just hard to accept. But I think he was just like inviting me just to be with him, like just be with me. That's it. Like, there's so many other things happening around, so many voices around, and I think just looking back, like that sacred space in that patient room, you know, being there, the gift of walking with someone as they have their last breath, being with family as they say their goodbyes, and experiencing that. And, you know, and I guess one story I want to share too was that, like, at the height of it in January, you know, the height of this, where we're just inundated with patients, and came home from work and I was just like over it, you know, it's just like done. I'm done. And I had just, you know, tried to survive this year, and I just came home like, I'm done, like just weeping, you know, and just holding so much of it throughout the year. And then I come home and just kind of like release everything, to Elliot, who's been like so supportive and just giving me this space. Sometimes I don't want to talk, sometimes I want to talk and say everything, but then this time I just came home and I was just weeping, I just like uncontrollably like sobbing. And like Shalom comes in and she walks in the room. She's like, like silent, like, what are you like, what's going on? And like it was happening for a while, and then like she would just like give me a stuffed animal to make me feel better, and she would sit and just look at me and watch me, and then like she started singing this bedtime song that we sing to her, like my peace I give to you. And seeing God there, like this little girl, she gets it. She gets like my peace, my Jesus, he's willing to give that peace to us. And like Ellie and I were just like laugh crying, and just like, man, like Shalom reminded us that he's there, he's sitting right here, and he's so real, and he gets it, he carries us, he in the ebbs and flow of everything of this year, whether or not we experience what we experienced, or we all have different struggles, but like he's there, and like experiencing God in the midst of that place, and also like in my family, and it's huge, like yeah, he's there.
Such a good word. Thanks for sharing all of that, Marianne. It is great to know that God does know what it's like to be on that war zone. He's familiar with death. He's familiar with all the darkness of this world. And I do feel like a lot of times as Christians, we want to jump towards meaning making and understanding and explaining way too prematurely. And in doing so, we kind of cause more damage. So we're not going to do that here. This is just going to, I'm going to leave us all with tension, because this is the reality of where you're at right now. As we begin to close our time, I think Wilson has a few final words, but before that, I want to just invite Amanda if she wanted to share a few parting thoughts before we give it to Wilson to end this time.
God's faithfulness has been the light in the darkness for us. His presence in the midst of all of these really hard moments has been like so tangible, whether it's through like prayer or worship, or through individual people supporting us and speaking out that truth when we needed to hear it. I do just also echo what Ryan was saying about learning how to abide in his presence and depend on him. It was so necessary for every day. I had a note in my phone that would just have verses that I would reflect back on when I needed that strength and I needed that reminder. And I do feel like something that I'm so thankful for of this past year is drawing close to God, and even trying to understand and know him more through this hard time, instead of like questioning why things were happening, trying to shift that to how do I be with God in all of it? How do I listen to him and respond to what he's calling me to do? Just like that verse in Esther that says, I've been placed here for such a time as this. Like, I do feel that, if I'm the one who's going to be there instead of the family member, how can I bring that light and love to somebody that I've just met to, or try to connect them, or try to care for them? That's been, I think, a sweet place of where God meets us in the suffering, and he promises that it won't be for nothing, so whether that was for my own discipleship and learning, and hopefully, that is something that we can bless other people with too. I wouldn't want to go back to where I was in my faith a year ago, because like God has just transformed and refined us through this fire. It really feels like that. And so now as we reflect and can worship and praise him for those things, I think I'll never be the same, and I can give thanks for that, even though I'm still in the midst of healing from it and recovering And another thing too is I feel like the verses of God being our refuge and our shield, like before I go into patients' rooms, like I could feel like God's presence being our shield. And I would pray that over, the caregiver next to me about to go into the room next to me, like God just be the protection, keeping them healthy and safe. And I just feel like that image, like him taking the weight of all of that, right? That's what he did on the cross for us.
Yeah, right.
He protected us and shielded us from that demise and from that inevitable future so we could be with him. And then now, so it's like, how do I be with you? Whether it's speaking out something over somebody, or loving them as you would love them, God, washing their feet, caring for them with gentleness and kindness and compassion. That's the way that I want to live, here on out.
Thank you, Amanda, for that work. Thank you. And praise the Lord for that microphone, because we really needed to hear your voice. We would have missed so much if that microphone wasn't fixed. Wilson, why don't you close our time together with some parting thoughts as we look forward to the future as well.
Yeah. I think throughout this experience, and it's just kind of recapping for myself, and it's been a rough year for a lot of people, for those who are helping. And I think a few main things, definitely one of them was like, everybody's important. Everybody's life matters. And definitely being in the experience to have those hard times for me, I work in a hospital, I'm a physician assistant. I deal with a lot of bad disease too, a lot of brain and spine, and I do a lot of life and death stuff, and it's hard. I love my job, but the worst part of my job is giving bad news to people, giving bad news to family, so just be reminded that, everybody's life is significant, has value. God gives us that value. And as healthcare workers, that's one of the main things that we are part of this profession, is wanting to help people, wanting to protect people and love them well, as all of us share. Just for us being Christians, part of it is being able to practice the presence of God, not just for ourselves, but for other people. Whether it be not just saying a word, but just laying a hand on them, pretending or imitating that we are Christ to them, saying that God loves them and God values them. So I think that's a huge for me, I think for all of us. And sometimes when we are understanding that for ourselves, we want that to be understood by others too, as this is sometimes just hard to fathom, like, how we want to value people and how we want to protect people. And one of the simple ways that we feel like people could do that is, follow certain guidelines of simply wearing a mask, try to protect themselves, and also in another sense, also protect others, and
Preach, Wilson.
I just want to, encourage people to just have that mindset of wanting to love others well, and how can we do that well? And I think it's not, unfortunately, it has, politicized and controversials of wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, but I think just simply just remembering that people's lives are valuable, and how can I keep that person alive, or how can I keep that person safe? And just being willing to collectively love each other well by that, yeah.
And I can't think of a more Christian thing to do in a time like this. Even if we don't need it, even if we're healthy, and even if we get COVID and we might be okay, to wear a mask is a way to love our neighbor who may not be in that same category. Well, thank you. I feel like we covered so much in such a short time today. Thank you all for sharing today. Thank you all for modeling Christ's presence. You guys were literally Christ's hands and feet during this last year for so many people. And I also even want to note that, you guys studied really hard for many, many years so that you can do this work right now and being God's hands and feet, you know. And I think that's another modeling for all of us to witness, that how hard you studied and how much you persevered in school so that you can do this kind of work, you know, so that you have that expertise and right to say this, to do the things that you're doing. And the passage of scripture that comes to mind when I think of the four of you is Matthew 6, verse 3-4. But when you give, as you've all given quite a lot this last year, do not let your left hand know that what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And again, I know it's so tough to share even right now, all the stuff this last year. Thanks for giving us all that gift. And I know that you've been holding a lot of that as a secret, not on purpose or anything, but the rest of us didn't know. So thank you for giving us a little window, so at least we have an opportunity to know and to see you and to walk with you a little more closely when we all are back together soon. And I know that there's this faithful hidden service and sacrifice that you all model here. And again, thank you for sharing that with us. And even as we listen to you, we are encouraged and edified. Well, I think this is a really appropriate time to transition to communion as we remember Christ's trauma, Christ's suffering, and Christ's presence in our lives. So as we land this plane of this panel, I want to invite Matt Stricker to continue our time by leading us through communion. Thank you again, panel.